strength means carrying everything, that resilience means enduring friction without breaking. But true power isn't found in constant resistance. At Black Mental Health Matters, we are redefining the narrative. There is immense strength in softness. There is courage in choosing to heal, in setting down the heavy lifting, and in claiming your peace as a non-negotiable right. We are building the infrastructure for impact. A collective space where the diaspora can find tools, community, and the unshakable permission to slow down, process, and thrive. Your healing is not a luxury, it is the foundation. Join the movement. Let's build a softer, stronger tomorrow together.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Black Mental Health Matters. I am the host for this morning, Miss Ariana Johnson. I'm a mental health social worker as well as a mental health advocate. It is great to be here once again. Today, we are going to be discussing a very serious topic within our community, generalized anxiety disorder. And I'm happy to be amongst the village of beautiful people of the diaspora. I believe in stepping up and stepping back, so I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and we're going to move forward with that. So whoever wants to, start first, feel free.
Ladies first. Ladies first.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ssemanda. I'm a psychiatrist, coach, researcher, and it's wonderful to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lesley Scott. I am a licensed master social worker located in Alabama. I actually am diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, so I'm sharing, both personal and professional insights. So I'm just excited to be a part of this conversation this morning.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Coreetha Entzminger. I am a mental health therapist that specializes in anxiety amongst depression and some other mental health illnesses. And I'm also an adjunct professor of psychology. It's good to be here.
Oh, everybody go? Okay, I guess it's me. Hello, everyone. My name is Kurt Lamarr Jones, and I am an actor as well as an educator. And I also have been diagnosed with anxiety. I've never heard of generalized, but I've been diagnosed with anxiety. So I guess that covers a multitude. But I'm really here to serve in the capacity of teaching as well as learning from you all, because I need some help, y'all.
We all do. We all
We're all on the healing journey.
I need some help.
And I think that all of us being, mental health advocates and clinicians in our own right, and full disclosure, I live with anxiety as well. We have that sense of connectivity to, the patients and the populations that we serve. So let's get into it. The first question that I have is, what are some common signs and symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder, and how can they be mistaken for everyday stress?
So if we're talking about, so there's a manual in psychiatry that we use, the DSM, and for generalized, because it's interesting, Kurt, because you had mentioned anxiety. Anxiety can look like lots of different things. There's panic disorder, there's generalized anxiety, but for generalized anxiety, usually you have to have symptoms for at least 6 months. There's got to be excessive worry, tension, restlessness, fatigue. You might have difficulty with concentrating and trouble sleeping. I think that anxiety is something that we all experience. It's just is this impacting your ability to function?
Yeah.
And to add to Dr. Elizabeth's point, when we think of chronic stress and fatigue and things like that, it's mostly due to external factors, right? Usually stress from something within our environment. But with generalized anxiety disorder or different types of anxiety or panic disorders, many of those factors are internal for the most part.
Yeah. I want to jump in and just add, I think a lot of times, especially in our community, Some of the things that show up as symptoms of anxiety has become very normalized as just it gets dismissed as, oh, this just life is, hard right now, you're going through a season. But definitely the overthinking, feeling on edge, just that blah feeling. A lot of that is normalized into just, oh, it's just regular stress. No, it's anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. But I think we have to also look at just the cultural nuances that play into kind of writing all things that really may be hurting us, and we just write it off as this is the way the family is, And I think being in the position of educators, talking about all of us, and we're in a position where we can really educate, enlighten, and introduce people to various perspectives that can really help them understand that, you know, um, it's not about just looking at things from one way, but researching, comparing, and contrasting, and looking at our lives, right? And looking at it from the perspective that we don't all live in a bubble. So it's about researching. It's about being able to open up our minds to say, hey, let me think about that. That's a different perspective. To give an example, I remember when I was in college, I came home and one weekend, and my mother was spanking my little niece, and she was about 6 or 7, and she wouldn't get up to go to school, right? And so I'm awakened to all this screaming, and I'm like, okay. So I went and spoke with my niece, and she was crying. She was like, I miss my mom. And at the time, her mother was basically on drugs. So her grandmother, my mother, was taking care of her. So I remember sharing with my mom. I said, Mom, I said, I took this Black Families in America class, and we had we were talking about the issue of how little children are not cognitively able to articulate what's going on in terms of stress. And so they act out. So I basically was sharing with my mom that my little niece was acting out because her mother's on drugs. If she's missing her mother, she wants to be with her mother. And so her acting out is a way of saying, hey, help me, you know.
Yes.
So my mother heard this perspective and she began to cry. And I said, Mom, why are you crying? Right. And she was like, I just never looked at it from that perspective. And I said, wow. I said the light bulb came on, but it was through my education and me,
Yes.
challenging her that gave her this idea that, okay, I see what's going on now. So that enlightenment was so necessary.
Yeah.
You
It's
you
time
brought
to
up
stop. Oh, go ahead. I apologize.
oh well, I was just gonna say you brought up like a couple different really important points that anxiety can look different based on the age of a particular person, and that within kids, behavioral issues are something that we typically see. Whereas adults may have more of the classic symptoms. So I think that's a really wonderful thing that you did. And then I also wanted to talk about like, you know, corporal, physical assault, because that,
Corporate punishment.
yeah, punishment, I think is something that it's interesting that you said that, because I was having a discussion with someone about that yesterday, and how cultural norms have changed, that there are
Hmm.
other ways to articulate or to help other people know that what they did was wrong, and that we can evolve, and that we can help other people um, change how they do things by communicating in an effective way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, just the destigmatization of mental health in our community, specifically in our individual family dynamics, plays a pivotal role in that, creating a space where our children are emotionally um, intelligent, and letting them know it's okay to be emotionally competent, and them responding in that way is not bad, or it's not, you're not defying me, but you're just expressing how you feel, because everybody said the same thing, is that symptoms and signs kind of show up in an individual way. Every we do have, like, the DSM-5 does have a set criteria of what signs and symptoms look like, but somebody who is living with anxiety might not exhibit all of those signs and symptoms. And so because of that, especially dealing, interacting with children, you have to let them know that it's okay to exhibit those, show signs of anxiety so that we can help you navigate through it in a more healthier and proper way. And this is kind of like a perfect segue into the second question. How does cultural expectations, such as the expectation to be strong, influence how anxiety is experienced or discussed in the Black community?
Let me say something to that. This focuses on Black males. Growing up in the inner city of Cleveland, single female headed household, on welfare. Had a brother who was super macho, in and out of prison. Had a father from the South who grew up with this idea that women only nurture kids, or at least boys. I'm the provider, and so my father was very, very. He was very mean to me, right? And I was trying to have this courtship of Eddie fathers type of relationship. I used to watch a lot of TV and had these preconceived notions of what father was about, and it didn't measure up to what I was actually dealing with in reality, which caused stress right there. Right, I'm looking for Andy Griffin. I'm aging myself, and Andy Griffin. Anyway, y'all know. And so, growing up in the hood, I had a lot of. I was a very sensitive kid because I was very close to my mother. I was a mama's boy, and my brother would not let me forget that. And so he was basically challenging me, basically trying to get me to see his concept of manhood. But I'm looking at him like, you in and out of jail. I've witnessed him physically beating up his girlfriends, a lot of domestic violence, right? And so I was viewed as being too sensitive if I talked about my feelings, right? And then playing basketball with the guys at school, there was a lot of anger, guys who would play ball, who would come to the courts drunk, and getting into this machismo thing. So I didn't really fit this machismo, African American, hood type mentality. And so guys used to talk about me. And so I began to become very self-conscious and afraid to show who I am, because I would be told, you're a punk, you're weak, you talking about your feelings, you don't do that. You check your girlfriends, you don't tell them you love them. So I had all of these negative, cultural, um, warped kind of perceptions that were just fueling, just bombarding my mind. But my personality didn't measure up to that. So consequently, I was judged, right, and ridiculed and bullied. I was beaten up many times to the degree where my face was cut. I was hit with a baseball bat, broken wrist. And so I grew up with all of this trauma and violence, and looking for affirmation through my father and my brother. Didn't get any of that, which has consequently led me to a place where, I've struggled with my self identity for years.
Yeah.
But through the grace of God, and my church home, I was able to see things from a different perspective, which has caused me to be who I am today and to be alive.
Yeah.
To Kurt's point,
I would.
okay.
I was just gonna say, when I in my intro when I shared a lot of the things that have become normalized in our communities and in our families, I think a lot of that comes from, historically Black families have to teach resilience. We've always had to be strong. Um, we talk about Christianity, religion, spirituality, Christianity. Growing up, we never talked about mental health. It was always pray about it. Or, you just need God, you need to pray more, you need to fast more, it was more so, it was something, mental health was something that was not out of our control. And I definitely think us as a cultural diaspora, um, we need to get to a point where we can understand strength and vulnerability can
Mm,
coexist.
Yeah.
yes.
And we got to
Love
move
that.
past, hey, you just need one thing. No, we all, I think Dr. Elizabeth said, we all have anxiety. We all deal with anxiety. It's a matter of how we approach it and how we take care of ourselves within that. So I guess the normalization of we all are not okay has to be, and it's okay to have, I always say I got a prescription and I got God. Like I have both. I got both. And it's okay for us to kind of have these type of conversations to normalize that.
Yeah. And the Kurt and Leslie's point, I grew up in the hood as well, at a time where mental health still was not spoken about. Went to high school in the early 2000s, and I always heard we don't deal with our issues that way, you know. So even for girls, right, you still had to put on a tough face because I grew
Yeah.
up in a gang-ridden area as well. You didn't want to be vulnerable. You can say, especially as a female, oh, I'm a little nervous, but that's it. And I grew up being an anxious child, and I still fought anxiety a little bit even in my adulthood. But yeah, the be strong, you don't show any weakness. You definitely don't talk about mental health because
Mhm.
even as a professional now in the mental health field, when I was younger saying, hey, I want to grow up and be a psychologist, the type of feedback I would get was, what? What? Why would you
Yeah.
wanna deal with crazy people, right? So you were
Mhm.
always seen as crazy, as weak, as someone who cannot handle what life throws at you, and especially if you come from a rough neighborhood or you come from, a place where you're supposed to be strong and put on a strong face over time, you learn to start masking mental health issues or any kind of vulnerability, even feelings as Kurt had mentioned, and as you mentioned, Leslie, the religious side of everything, right? Give
Mhm.
it over to God
Mhm.
or pray it away. That's just the devil.
Yeah, the devil. That's a big one, especially down south.
Yeah. And also this whole notion of, if you want to be a psychologist, you trying to be better. You trying to act like you white. So why do we associate positive things with trying to be white?
That's
And
Right.
out
then
of white supremacy. That's internalized. No, never mind. I will get on a rampage about that. Never mind. Go ahead.
But look if you need to, because this is a safe space.
No, it's
Uh,
okay. We'll come
yeah.
back.
But I will say, and the fact that I think a lot of our brothers and sisters are apprehensive about going to therapy, specifically to treat anxiety, is they feel like that's is a cultural disconnect. They
Yeah.
feel like they're going to sit in front of a white middle aged therapist who's of the middle or the upper middle class. You don't know what I've gone through, so why would I pay you out of pocket or out of insurance to help me when you don't even know what I'm going through? So that's a big, part of it. And then also, this strong black woman motif when being strong is celebrated. You know, when
Yeah.
we have to, and that I feel like, and Taraji P Henson said it best. That strong black woman thing, I wish they wouldn't even came up with that, because what you're saying to a black woman, in particular, and I know black men go through it as well, that we have to suppress whatever we're going through, in order to save our community and save ourselves. Well, we need to take care of ourselves and say, hey, I'm not feeling my best right now and I need to decompress for a moment.
And they've actually done some research on. There's someone by the name of Dr. Cheryl Woods Giscombe, and she's talked about the superwoman schema, strong black woman schema, where it you have to display strength, you suppress emotion, you resist vulnerability, and you succeed despite very limited resources, and how um, it has is consistently linked to more anxiety, depression, and stress.
Mhm.
And so we have an opportunity to move forward and be more human and show that, um, I think, Leslie, you said that we can be strong, but we can also be vulnerable, and we can get the help that we need when we need it.
Mhm.
I'm just really excited about this conversation, and these questions are very transitional. So we're just going to expound upon that. What role can discrimination and chronic stress play in the development of worsening anxiety symptoms?
That's a really good question. I want to share with you an incident that happened to me. I'm a standardized patient, which is like a patient actor where I work with nurses, nursing students, medical students, PA students. And so I was at Emory, and I got there a little early. And so the place where I had to go, they had it, the door was locked. And so this cleaning guy, he was a brother, he opens up the door. He opens up the door for me because it's locked, right? And so I had noticed some other folks who didn't look like me, where he just let them in, right? So when he let me in, I had to go to the bathroom. He followed. He came into the bathroom, and I'm thinking, this guy following me in the bathroom. And so he started questioning me, like, "So what are you doing here?" And I was just like, "Is he asking me that because I'm?" And I started thinking about back in the slavery days, where the master would incorporate a black person to kind of oversee
Mhm.
the slaves while he was away, and that slave was like, I gotta please master. So I pictured this guy being in that mode, who was questioning, like, why are you here, right? And but I'm like, you opened the door for me, but now you're interrogating me as to why are you here? And it bothered me to the point where I became very stressed out, and I passed out that day. A couple of hours later, I was outside with some nurses. Thank God I was at a nursing school. And I started like feeling really weird because that bothered me. It bothered me to the point where it just really stressed me out. And and before I knew it, I was on the ground surrounded by these nurses, and they were like, wow, and then they called the ambulance. And so long story short, I thought to myself, why did that bother me? And thought, racism, discrimination, because sometimes we as African American folks, we act just like master in terms of just our perception towards each other and how we denigrate one another, right? But we're, happy to just accommodate white folk. And I've seen that in the South in particular, right? And so it's just the racism, it affects everybody, right? So, yeah.
Racism can worsen anxiety symptoms. Uh, a professor at the University of Utah coined a term called racial battle fatigue. William A. Smith, back in 2003, coined that term because it describes a hostile environment of being constantly exposed to a racially hostile environment. Now, it's different when you just have a little anxiety, but when you have that constant exposure to racism, discrimination, stereotyping, even, and that need to constantly prove yourself, it's almost as if you're in a battlefield, right? So you get fatigued. And as you would describe, and Kurt, like, it's to the point where it's so upsetting, even if you don't outwardly show it, right? Sometimes it's internalized and you have
Mhm.
that inner conflict within yourself. Like, what is he really doing this for? I hope he's not being racist, but it's still stuck with you to the point where there is fatigue and your body will show it. Your body
Yeah.
will definitely wear down.
I'll give you another quick example. When I was 18, I was living in Cleveland, and I was crossing the street, and these police cars started to surround me, like they blocked me in. And so I'm thinking, whoa, what's happening? So it was this white officer who rolled down his window, right, as he was blocking me. And I said, officer, I said, what's the problem? He's like, shut up. And I'm like, whoa, right? And so he would even tell me why he stopped me. So he got on his walkie-talkie, for lack of a better term, and I guess the suspect that they were looking for, they had apprehended. So he didn't apologize to me. He was like, okay, you can go. And so that was a very traumatizing experience for me. It's like, wow, it's like he'd even say, hey, I apologize, for the inconvenience. We're looking for a suspect. It was like no explanation. It was just like, shut up and just listen. So that was my first encounter, with police, in terms of being stopped. Right. And so I hear so many stories of Black men and women, people of color who have had these similar experiences with law enforcement, and even with some Black law enforcement. I remember I was going to a concert, and there was an officer who he was basically getting the pedestrians to move across the street. Right. And so I was with my mom. I took my mom to this concert, and the officer says, he was like, you need to move, brother. I'm trying to, and I said, hey, so I'm a mama's boy. You don't talk about my mother like that. You don't disrespect her. And I told myself, I said, who you talking to? I said, you don't have to disrespect us. Now I have respect for law enforcement, but when my mama, that goes
Yeah.
out the window. Yeah.
Kurt, I heard you mention about the South, and I just wanted to add in, When we talk about racism, anxiety, I just encountered a workplace discrimination incident, and it resulted in me walking away from my full-time job. It the I am from Alabama, so I am born and raised, home of the civil rights movement. And I think a lot of times, especially when you mentioned, black people, it, how racism can be internalized in us down south, that was means of safety, back during Jim Crow. If you wanted to protect yourself, you might be the one, doing that, playing that role. And I think as we move through history, we move through time, that is just manifesting. It's the same role manifesting in different ways. But I definitely think like racism. I've experienced racism my whole life. There's not one particular incident where I can say that my race has never been a matter of how I am treated. And I think um, we have to get to a place where we are comfortable with calling that out, especially in the workplace. Discrimination, racism, it can exacerbate our anxiety, and it can it can manifest in physical ways. So I definitely think, us as a culture, we need to understand history. I think we need to understand um the history of things, how things were created, and how black people, how we just were just thrown into the mix of things, and how a lot of what is, normalized now, that was means of survival. That was just all that they had to kind of hold on to. Um, I definitely think we need to be more mindful. We don't have to put up with certain things in the workplace. We need to start advocating for ourselves more. But that comes again with, personal development and, how you feel advocating for yourself. But we have to normalize calling it out for what it is and not just normalizing that.
I completely, I absolutely agree that we have to empower ourselves and that we can talk respectfully about
Mhm.
things that we see and just, speak our truth with clarity and confidence. And just to, I wanted to add that there has been research. There was a national survey of American life where researchers found that race-based discrimination specifically predicted lifetime generalized anxiety for African Americans. And there are real physical consequences from chronic exposure to racism, discrimination, and socioeconomic stress that can cause wear and tear in the body. And that
Mhm.
can affect our cardiovascular system, it can affect our immune system, and even like our metabolic symptoms. So I think that, something has to change. And I want to remind people that we are powerful and that when we do our work, when we change what's going on within ourselves, our outer environment, our world changes.
Absolutely. And I think that, to everyone's point, talking about being Black in the workplace is a conversation in and of itself, because I think that a lot of us, when we deal with internal racism in the workplace, we go through that phase of gaslighting ourselves, trying to make it seem like, oh, well, that wasn't microaggressions that they just said. Maybe I'm just, just overreacting when it really is, and then we start to internalize that sense of anxiety, and then it starts to become more and more and more prevalent until we start feeling or exhibiting physical symptoms. And I'm in private practice right now, and I tell my clients all the time, you're feeling a certain way for a reason. So don't go into a sense of avoidance, go into a sense of observation. Why am I feeling this way? What happened? Is this an environmental stressor that's causing me to feel this way? And we as Black people, we really need to have those conversations within, with, one on one internally, but also amongst ourselves. That, if we're experiencing something in the workplace in particular, and it's making us feel uncomfortable, we walk past a certain coworker and our, blood pressure goes through the roof, then that means that that's an environmental stressor and we need to deal with that. Um, the next question, and we talked about this, briefly about how, sometimes our faith-based organizations play a role in us stopping us from getting help, and then the messaging that we have received from generation to generation about mental health in the Black community. But are there any other barriers that are in place within the Black community that causes somebody to not seek help, specifically to treat anxiety?
I think cultural. I think cultural nuances. I think, like in my family, we were told, we don't tell people our business. You don't go outside the family, so things are kept secretive, and that I think that's a very prominent, dysfunctional mentality within any of our communities of color, right? And so we're told, and especially as a man, it's like, you're a man. You're supposed to. We've been taught to compartmentalize our pain.
Yeah, and to that point, I would say stigma, just mental health stigma within the community, but also in individual families. But even outside of that, there are certain barriers as far as availability for mental health specialists, but also a mental health specialist of color that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So there's barriers there as well. Sometimes financial barriers of when we look at certain areas of being of lower socioeconomic status or rural areas as well. So there's a lot more barriers on top of discrimination when it comes to anxiety treatment.
Yeah. And I wanted to say this because sometimes you can find a therapist or a psychiatrist, but the expertise that you need is fairly rare. Like, um, if I like if someone had obsessive compulsive disorder and I needed some,
I
I mean,
do.
I might be able, well, I might be able to find like a therapist, but they might
Hmm.
not specialize in like prolonged exposure and had enough um, expertise on that. So I think like that's another barrier that sometimes people don't think of. Like, yeah, you can find a therapist, but do they really know or have the expertise for what your particular situation needs?
Yeah, I definitely think what can kind of add on to that, also the education of, different modes of therapy. I think when we talk therapy, everyone automatically assumes talk therapy, where,
Mm,
somatic therapy, EMDR,
yes.
I think that for us as a culture, to heal that trauma, I definitely think, a lot of people are just they're just not aware. There's access to care. There's all kind. The barrier is being black. The barrier is everything about us. It's not, the system is not set up for us to have that type of access. That's why insurance. And you see the how insurance is going. Nope, a lot of people don't have access via insurance. A lot of people don't have, okay, $250, maybe out of pocket to go to a session. So across the board, we're starting 100 miles from the starting point. We're still having to play catch up, and until we address the systemic issues, culturally, we're at a standstill.
I'm
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna push. Can I? Oh, go ahead.
No,
Oh,
go ahead.
well, I'm gonna say this. I think I'm gonna push back a little bit on that. Just because
Mhm.
the internet exists, there was a time before where I remember I'm old enough, and I know I look young, but I'm older. But where I remember having to go to the library and get books
Mhm.
and try to figure. But there are actually a lot of resources available and are resources for free and
Yeah.
apps. Like there actually is a lot of there are some things available. I think sometimes being able to discern like okay what's appropriate and what's not.
Hmm. Yeah, and I definitely think with that, education, and I think Dr. Coreetha, you spoke about rural areas here down south. You might live in an area there's no internet access, and I think the educational part of it, the average reading level, in America is sixth grade, which I think is lower. I think it's lower, so that education, a lot of people have not had the access to. Okay, I can use this app, or I know what this means. We look at our older generation who may not be so tech savvy. I remember going to the library. I had a library card. I was at the library every Saturday. growing up. So, I'm kind of in that bridge generation with technology. And I definitely think, just saying, there's the internet, there's a lot of things on the internet that a lot of people hold to fact. And, when we get in sessions with people, or, when I'm speaking somewhere, or, I have an opportunity to educate, they're coming with a lot of, untruths. Well, I talked to Chat GPT, or, well, I Googled this,
Yeah.
I saw this on Reddit. So
Yeah.
I definitely think it's a great, if you know how to use it, it is a great
Yeah.
tool. And I think the other systemic issues can kind of play a role in, if this is a good tool for, a specific, demographic of, whatever color dynamic you are. So
Yeah, I want to share this with you. When I was in graduate school, I had a professor who, white woman, who I believe was very culturally insensitive. We had a group counseling class, group counseling. So we had an experimental group, the group that would actually sit in the circle, and we had one of those one-sided mirror type deals where you had the control group, experimental group. So long story short, this professor, she was encouraging the white students to attack me, right? And it was just me, one African-American male and one African-American female. So the young lady, the sister, she was watching how this woman was facilitating this process of me being attacked, right? And so when I tried to defend myself because these white students were coming at me, the professor attempted to put her hand over my mouth to speak on my behalf. And when I looked at her, like, because I was shocked, I was like, "Are you getting ready to put your hand over my mouth to cover me from expressing myself?" And then she took my tie and she put it around my mouth and she said, "Now, what Curtis is trying to say." And so the following week, we got all the groups together. And so all the white students, they blasted her. I didn't have to say anything. They were like, "Why did you do that? We noticed that you were treating the white students differently, and you tried to put your hand on put your hand on across Curtis's mouth to keep her from speaking." And then the young African American lady, she started crying. She was like, "See, this is what we deal with in our communities." And so I told the professor, I said, "What you did to me reminded me of slavery in terms of how people back then, white people, were trying to speak on our behalf. They were telling us how to think, when to speak, how to speak, And so she turned beet red, and she claimed that what she was doing was engaging us in the group therapeutic process. Go figure, right?
Mhm.
So I had problems with this lady from every class. And I remember one time I came into class early because I would come to class early. And so I left out to go to the restroom. And when I came back, when there were more students there, she pretended like I was late. Now, she had seen me when I came in, but she said, "Curtis, why are you so late?" And I said, "Wait a minute, you just saw me, right?" And so she says, "Well, I was just playing with you." I said, "Look, don't play with me. We're not here to play." Right. And she says, "Why are black men so volatile?" And I said, "Well, let me go get the black diaspora code book, and I'll come back with that answer." Right. And so all of that created stress when I was in graduate school. Right. So it's just years of being encumbered with all of these negative experiences that have really contributed to this anxiety.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the aggressions that we deal with, just being a part of the Black diaspora, everything from uh, microaggressions to even sometimes aggressions that we inflict upon ourselves can exacerbate our anxiety, and then it turns into like physical responses, which is why we need to be mindful about that. And I tell my clients all the time, specifically the Black ones who are just new to reaching out and gaining therapy, this is a journey. And this is definitely like a trial and error, journey that consists of trial and error. If EMDR doesn't work for you, maybe talk therapy will. If yoga doesn't work for you, then maybe, practicing mindfulness will. If CBT doesn't work for you, maybe DBT will. If PCT doesn't work for you, we'll find something else. But, just us continuing to introduce all of these therapeutic modalities to our clients, specifically our Black ones, will open up the conversation, and then hopefully they'll be able to take it and bring it into their respective communities and say, hey, this works for me, and if this doesn't, then this does. I tell my clients all the time, create a toolbox for yourself, especially when it comes to treating anxiety, because one thing might work one time, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work the second time.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point that there are so many different types of therapies, and then medications are an option. I,
Mhm.
that people can consider. But I will say this, right? One of the best tools for, or what I believe as far as anxiety is concerned, is being able to face your fear.
Yeah.
That's where, you take away the power that anxiety has over you when you face it. When you go against the grain and you don't avoid the situation, then anxiety will no longer bully you. But sometimes it's hard, like, and people are at different spaces, so they might need medication or they might want therapy. And then there are other things too that can help. And then you had mentioned the faith-based communities, and I do think they play an integral role in this, because that's where people go, right? And so we cannot neglect the importance of that, the importance of spiritual maintenance, and and I truly believe, that right now they're even doing, like, I go to church, and I notice, like, my pastor is, like, talking about CBT, like, he's not saying CBT, but you're talking CBT. So, like, there are psychiatric interventions that some churches are doing within themselves, and so there's a lot of potential for collaboration. It doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of that. I'm a firm believer in medication. I would not be sitting here right now if I was not on medication. And it took a lot of acceptance, with me being, a mental health clinician, like, hey, you need something, and it was like, oh, well, I have all the tools in my toolbox. I have the education, I lead people to healing. How come I can't do it on my own? So that level of acceptance, and I talk about being on medication to kind of normalize that, to kind of erase that stigma, because in our culture it's a heavy stigma attached to medication. Oh, you crazy? Oh, you
Yeah.
throw it off?
Yeah.
I might be, but hey, I'm here. I'm here. My mental health is intact. I am at peace. And so I definitely think it has to be a good balance. I'm a Libra, so I say, my Libra scale has to be balanced. I got my prayer and I got my prescription. They go hand in hand. And I think the more we talk about these type of things more openly, the more people are like, okay, well, if it worked for her, if it worked for him, or they know somebody, yeah, I'm on medication. The more we talk about it, I think the more people will be able to kind of accept that, I might need a little bit more than what I'm currently doing, and it's okay.
Yes.
Just like the symptoms look different from person to person, the treatment looks different from person to person. That's why in the mental health field, we do treatment planning on an
Yeah.
individual level. And just like you, Ariana, I tell my clients a lot of the same thing in private practice. Trial and error. What works for you now and your anxiety symptoms now may not work a few months from now or a few years from now. But it's important to continuously have some kind of toolbox, whether it be medication, whether it be talk therapy, or a little bit of both. Also, the support system that you mentioned, Dr. Elizabeth, with the faith community. It's
Hmm.
good to just have a support system even outside of
Yes.
therapy as well. So, yeah.
Yes.
It
Leslie,
doesn't have to be either or. I love you saying that, Dr. Elizabeth, because some people think it is. And no,
Yes.
we need we can have all the support we need.
that
Yes.
is that is that is true. Leslie, I appreciate you talking about the medication because I've been struggling with that. I have developed some health issues as a result of the chronic stress. Back in
Hmm.
2022, I lost my mother, and then 5 months later, my sister passed, and then the next year, my
Yeah.
father passed. The next
Hmm.
month, my brother passed, and then my best friend passed a month ago, and then my nephew passed about a month ago. And so it's all these deaths, right? And it's just like I'm like, wow, so that has caused me to have some health issues.
Yeah.
AFib, what is it, AFib, and then
Mm-hmm.
high blood pressure, right? And and I ended up having a mini stroke, TIA,
Oh, wow.
Oh,
right? And it's just,
geez.
yeah, so it's just like, okay, I need some help. I've had some therapy. I was in a position that was so stressful, where I ended up in the hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, God, what do you want from me? What do I need to do to get better? So the medication is something that I've been kind of pushing away, because
Why?
because we live in a society that makes so much money off of managing illness, right? As opposed to coming up with more natural ways of
Mm-hmm.
overcoming these modalities or these illnesses, right? So I know that it's twofold. There's some good things about a pharmaceutical medication and about the medical industry, but then there's a part that focuses on capitalism.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's twofold.
And
I
this
can
is why I said what I said about the treatment looking differently for everybody.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I want to say to that, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say real quickly. Um, I push back hard on medication myself, but it took my therapist saying, my psychiatrist actually, I just prescribed you, some meds to help you sleep, meds for physical pain. What about your mental pain?
Mm.
It took my provider saying that, you know what, I need that. So I have my prescription, medication, and I also have, my other spiritual medication as well. So I definitely think becoming more normal, because it's a brain thing. I think a lot of people think it's more emotions. Sometimes it is a chemical imbalance in your brain. Sometimes it is
I,
something that you can't just talk through. It's something going on internally, and it can manifest in many different ways. So I want us to, just kind of be more open to it. If you've never tried it, it might work, it might not. We got to take risks, because we got to take care of both our mental and physical.
And I agree with that. And I'm not disagreeing with you. It's just that
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
just have mixed feelings about it. So that's where I am.
Yeah.
I wanted to say this, that there are many ways to heal, that even if we go back in the day, right? Like our ancestors might make some sort of a tea, like chamomile tea or
Mhm.
lavender tea to help with anxiety. So I think um I really think it has to, like what I think Dr. Coreetha um, and Lesley have said, that it really, like, you got to make it work for you.
Yes.
And then I think that also it needs to be relayed that all of these treatment modalities can coexist, right?
Yeah.
You can
Mhm.
use non-medicinal alternatives paired with faith-based alternatives, paired with medication management, paired with, in person, or maybe talk therapy or something that has to do with a therapist or a clinician. And to everyone's point, it's just not one way. It has to do with your individual treatment plan and what works well for you. And I think that, messaging has to constantly be relayed. And so these questions are very transitional. I just love this conversation. How can faith, family, and community support positively impact someone living with generalized anxiety disorder while encouraging professional treatment when needed? I know, Dr. Elizabeth, you mentioned how your pastor has talked about, his messaging is centered around CBT. So I kind of want to delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah, like I just noticed, so I think there's actually a lot of research on this, that there, like there have been many interventions that have been done within the class, within the church, um, and it's very rich. I think there was one study with older African Americans that found that um, the closeness to church members weakened the link between experiencing discrimination and meeting criteria for a psychiatric disorder. Um, so uh, so there is just, it's such a rich place to be, like if we are interested in truly getting at at the Black community because, you know, a lot of us go there. But it can't be the only place. Um, I guess from what I have seen, at least my experience with my church, like I'm like I go to church and I kind of review, like now I look through the lens of a psychiatrist, like as I'm sitting there and he is my pastor like is going through like CBT, ACT, like people don't know it, but like but he is, and it's so cool to kind of see that he's not naming it, but he's using the concepts and the principles of it um as he's giving out as he's lecturing, and so it's pretty cool to see. And we
That's
also have groups too, and there are mental health groups within our church, and uh, you know, people can start all kinds of things. So those are other areas where the church and faith and mental health come together.
I think I was just thinking about the anxiety that's related to African Americans wanting to go to see doctors because I've read studies, I've heard many Black women in particular talk about how when they're talking to their white doctors, they aren't really taken seriously. They're saying, "Hey, this is what's going on with my body," but they're being told, "No, no, no, I'm the doctor." And I used to work at a hospital as a patient relations rep, and I remember talking to a young lady who had just had a baby, and she was complaining about her doctor. Right, the doctor had told her, "Look, when she wanted to basically say, hey, this is what I think it is," and the doctor responded, "Well, I'm the doctor. I'm educated. I know better." Right. And so I've heard many stories of Black women who said they've had these negative experiences with doctors who dismiss what they're saying. So then there's a lot of distrust and anxiety around going to see physicians too, and wanting to see someone who can really relate and really appreciate what that person is going through, and not, dismiss or diminish what they're saying about, this is what's going on with me. Listen to what I'm saying. I know my body better than you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that within the medical profession, there's a range. Like within any profession, there's a range of you know, people that you encounter. But I do want to encourage women to seek help, and that there are like you know, there are people out there who care deeply, or at least the physicians that I know care deeply, like deeply for their patients, and will go the extra mile. And that you know, I do think that unfortunate that those experiences of not being heard exists. But I also think that those experiences are not necessarily um, like other. I feel like women in other races have also experienced those things too. So I think that this is, you know, a call to all physicians to, like, we have to do our own work. We've got to do it. You know, we have to be able to um, listen, and then also be aware of the biases that we come to each clinical encounter with, and create a plan for uh, personal development.
And it's
Right.
important.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'm
it's
sorry.
important to create a support system. When you talk about faith and then in our communities, create that support system of people who will be behind you and teach you how to advocate, because in a lot of these spaces, we do have to learn to advocate for ourselves. And sometimes those moments that you talk about, and I've experienced that too, as an expectant mom, like some discrimination as well. It doesn't feel good, but it's also a teaching moment of how do we advocate for ourselves in these spaces, even when it comes to our mental health, so that we can have less anxiety over time if we are faced with this unfortunate situation again. Because there are ways to advocate. And when you do have that support system of pastors, as you mentioned, Dr. Elizabeth, or just other community people in your community and your families, wherever you can find that sense of support to say, this is what happened to me. I was discriminated against. What can I do the next time this may happen to me? Or how can I feel empowered so that this doesn't happen to me, causing me further anxiety?
Yeah, and I think we have to educate ourselves too. Like I talk to homeopathic doctors because we live in a society where, MDs basically are taught from a Western perspective, right? And so I listen to physicians who embrace the Eastern medicine perspective, where they talk about homeopathic remedies, herbs, natural things. So I like a comprehensive viewpoint surrounding medicine, right? Because I know there have been times I've gone to the doctor and they won't even ask, well, what are you doing? Like I used to have problems with acid reflux, and I went to a doctor and he says, well, okay, well, here, this is and he just prescribed me medication. Didn't ask me, well, what are you eating? Because I was eating Thanksgiving dinner at 12 midnight, going to sleep, right? But he never asked me, well, what's your lifestyle like? He was quick to prescribe medication. And I see that there's a lot of emphasis on prescribing medication and not really digging deeply to find out, well, what's going on? What are you not doing? That will keep you healthy. And so I respect physicians who take a comprehensive perspective around health and who have studied other perspectives other than just Western medication.
Yeah, I do think so. I'm a holistic psychiatrist, so I think that there is so much value in looking at other systems of healthcare. So they're like Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine, because they focus like there's an emphasis on finding a balance or being balanced or harmony, coherence, that sort of thing. I do think that there is a movement within the United States right now. Like for me, like there's something called integrative psychiatry, where we do focus on looking at many other things. And I do believe that we need to move past symptom based treatment and really focus on root causes, because I think that is where we're going to have, get the most bang for our buck. And I think that focusing on, on care that is that way is satisfying, not just for patients, but for practitioners as well.
And we have to keep in mind too that the medicine field, as far as the United States, let's focus on the United States. It's connected to revenue, capitalism, right? When I worked at the hospital, I remember talking with a nurse who said, "Hey, I can't work this weekend, or I have to work less because." The hospital is trying to cut back on money because we don't have enough people in the beds, right? And so there's this emphasis to keep people in the beds. And I remember talking with patients who said, "Hey, I should have left out of here a couple of days ago or last week, but they just keep finding ways to keep me here." And so there are a lot of things behind the scenes that we don't know about in terms of what ties into revenue and what these systems, what these hospitals are basically incorporated in terms of making sure that they have X amount of dollars within the system.
I don't know. I mean, that's a touchy subject,
Yeah.
because I've also been on the other side of it as a physician who really wanted my patient to have longer care, and just felt like the patient was, we had to get the patient out, like pushed by the insurance company um, to get the patient out. Like they
That's
wouldn't
true.
cover treatment. And so I've been on the other side where I really want my patient to get the treatment that they need. And
That's true too. Yeah.
And two
That's
things
true.
could be true at once in this case, right?
Exactly. That's true too. Yeah.
So we are coming to an end, but I do want to wrap it up and just ask, and this is for anyone, obviously, what type of conversations do we need to have with our brothers and sisters in our community about, helping to reduce the stigma and helping, encouraging them to get help to treat their generalized anxiety disorder?
Just letting them know that it's okay to need help, that we all need help in one way or another, and that the sooner you get help, just like I believe Lesley mentioned that we do things and we get medicated sometimes for our physical symptoms. Why should our mental health be any different? So that's what I'm going to leave with.
Anyone else?
yeah, well, I really want to emphasize just the importance of being an advocate for yourself and taking ownership of your life. And, I understand that sometimes you don't cause all the issues in your life, but you are the one that has this body, and you need to do something about it. So I really want to encourage people to seek out treatment if they need it, to really, really connect with their inner strength and their courage, and have the courage to stand up for themselves.
That's right.
I think we
Excellent.
need to go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. And on that, we have to wrap it up. And but I think everyone.
Wow.
Kurt, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, we just have to keep educating, informing, and enlightening one another, and have these kinds of discussions in the churches and in the communities where people can really hear what we really need to really focus on to keep us thriving.
Yes.
And on that note, I thank everyone for joining us this Saturday morning. I appreciate you all. Let's take time to take care of ourselves and each other. And until next time, thank you.
Bye, everybody. Enjoyed you.
Bye.